Take this over to our friend Paul Rieckhoff, who's with me here in New York. Of course, Paul's a national security analyst, an Army veteran, host of the Independent Americans podcast. You know, maybe we can pick up, good to see you, Paul, by the way, with where the congressman left off on the Netanyahu issue here, and whether, you know, him not being opened to any kind of a future for the Palestinians in terms of a Palestinian state is getting in the way. What's your view on that?
I think it's always going to get in the way. I mean, people are going to fight harder if they don't have a future. And I think that Netanyahu and Israel have failed to present what the future looks like. It reminds me of the early days of the Iraq invasion. We said we're going to take Baghdad. And what happens afterward? We didn't have a plan for what happens afterward. And I think that puts everyone in a bad situation. We also got to understand asking people nicely to stop doesn't work, right? We've tried that with Putin. It didn't work. You try that with Hamas. It doesn't work. Trying that with Iran doesn't work. And now 3 Americans are dead. We knew this moment would come, and we're going to have to amplify our response. We're going to have to take out their capacity, just not just ask them nicely to stop.
Let's talk about that a little bit, and we'll put up the 3 American soldiers. And that's what this is all about now. There's real Americans. There they are. Sergeant Rivers, Specialist Sanders, Specialist Moffett. They were killed in this attack when one of these drones finally got through. So now the response, you're saying, has to be tougher.
Yes.
You know, you'd rather go too tough than the other way around.
Yes.
I mean, inside Iran, by the way, that's
if
what we're
necessary, yeah. I mean, you know, their rockets aren't bound by the borders. Now, we obviously have to have a conversation with the American people, and Congress has to have a conversation with the American people about what's already happened. Yeah. I mean, Iran doesn't want war, but war is going to want them if they keep this up, and it does already. So this is kind of chasing the dog chasing the car at this point. We knew Americans would die. We're lucky it didn't happen sooner. The question is, are we going to wait till more Americans die before we put together a response that takes out their capacity and punishes Iran for allowing this to continue?
What's next after we do that? Do you raise the risk of something much greater than what we're dealing with
yes,
right now?
But the risk is always raised. I mean, that's the problem in this kind of situation. The same is true with Ukraine. You can't not punch someone because they might punch you back when they're already punching you.
There's no good answers.
No, there is no simple situation here.
Right.
And we have to protect our own. We have to protect our interests. We have to protect our homeland. And we have to protect our allies. And sometimes that means hitting first.
You think the president does this in a sustained way? We were talking about this on the show a little bit yesterday, as opposed to, you know, a night of really, you know, big strikes to make a message that maybe there's a little bit more here, that it's going to go on for days or a week or more.
I think that's his responsibility. He has to frame this up for the American public as another phase of this now global conflict with multiple enemies who want to see harm against America. I don't think he set that stage early enough and well enough on Ukraine. I think he's tried to do it on Israel and fumbled a bit, and now he's got to do it on Iran. You can't wait till dozens of Americans are dead or until there's a much more amplified conflict to set the stage and explain to the American people what's going on, what are our goals, and what are our responses going to be. And strap in, because this is going to be difficult and there are no easy outs.
Yeah, what about the hostages? Because that's another thing. These talks are going on. There was a story that Semaphore, the outlet Semaphore, had that suggested there might be some sort of a deal, but it would include the leaders of Hamas being allowed to take refuge in another country, right? You know, they might go to Algeria or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, somewhere like that. Does that make sense to you, allowing the Hamas leaders to leave? I mean, I guess they did it supposedly with Arafat years ago, but this seems different.
I think priority number one has got to be get the hostages out.
No matter what it takes.
No matter what it takes. And then if they go somewhere else, you could still hunt them down later. But I think we've got Americans who are being held. You've got children who are being held. And I think sometimes folks in America forget that. I mean, these people have been there for months in captivity being tortured. Yeah. And how would you feel if your son or daughter, if it was your child, in captivity being held by a violent terrorist organization that has already killed some hostages?
Is Netanyahu helping or hurting in that effort now with his strategy and the things he's been saying in terms of the hostages, do you think?
It looks like it's not making progress right now. I mean, you got to judge him on the outcome, and if he can get them out, it'll be a success. If he loses them all, it'll be a failure. He's in a very difficult situation, but ultimately they've got to focus on that goal of getting the hostages out and his stated goal of eliminating Hamas.
All right, Paul, always good to see you. Thank you very much. So I want to tell everybody, Paul, he's, as I said, the host of the Independent Americans podcast. Tomorrow on his podcast, he continues this type of talk with Alexander Vindman, who, of course, is the former Director for European Affairs for National Security Council at the White House, who we remember from all the Ukraine testimony there. So that's coming up on Paul's podcast. Look it up, The Independent American.